kind of talk to me about your history, your knowledge on that?
Sure. So I'm a limnologist, which is a individual that studies freshwaters. And one of my interests is looking at blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, their toxins, how they're distributed across the lakes, and then what we can do to remediate lakes. Also interested in what causes the onset of these blooms.
So you are the right guy to talk to.
Hopefully.
So I guess, first of all, if you can kind of give a little bit of background, is it common for the inland Northwest, Eastern Washington, Northern Idaho, to see just such a common occurrence or prevalence of blue-green algae in our area? What is it like now compared to years in the past?
It's highly seasonal, and then some lakes have them some years, some lakes don't have them. You know, it comes and goes. But this year, I think what's happening is the reason they're so prevalent is because of the heat that we're experiencing. It's an unusually warm summer, and that's coupled with a very dry or low snowpack winter that's given us very little water in the lakes. And so the inflows, the rivers that are coming in our inflows are very, very reduced. And as a result of that, the water renewal time is very slow, right? So the turnover time, the amount of flushing that occurs in the lake is very, very low. And so with warm temperatures, these organisms really, really like the very warm temperatures.
And so are there some lakes in your experience, some areas of water in our area that have been the most common, have most commonly seen blue-green algae blooms, as opposed to this year where we're seeing new?
Sure, there's our usual suspect of lists of lakes. So for example, in Hayden Lake at the north end is very prevalent, is on a regular occurrence. Black Lake in northern Idaho, and then Fernan Lake. Those are the typical suspects that are very reliable on an annual, on an annual basis, that have these bloom occurrences.
And who are some of the surprising bodies of water? I know we had some reports in Sagle, Slough, and Comeback Bay, I believe. We just got a release about that a few weeks ago. Has that been on the radar as well?
They haven't been in the past. So let's see, a couple of years ago it was really colorful across the Northwest, and then last year was pretty quiet, and then this year obviously we're having another major bloom or outbreak season.
And so what you were saying, heat really is a factor this year. So that heat wave we experience, can you kind of explain why that is?
Well, so these organisms are very, very tolerant of high temperatures, and they actually, the warmer it gets, the better they do. And so they have a competitive advantage at very high temperatures and very low flow.
So how harmful would you say blue-green algae is to humans?
So there are guidelines that are set by the EPA and the World Health Organization. And there's a suite of toxins that are present, and there's a limit for each of those toxins. So the limits are meant to protect human health. And then, so there's drinking water, so that's the ingestion part, and those are much, much lower than the contact, because you're only having contact on the outside. The idea is not to ingest it, right? Now, when you're out swimming, you have to be really careful. So when lakes are posted, and when our Department of Environmental Quality or Ecology posts lakes, it's really, people should heed those warnings, because there is that risk of ingesting a fatal dose. The other important thing to note with these toxins is that there is no antidote to them. And so if you do get a lethal dose, then lethality is the end result of that. And so the whole reason that lakes are posted and water bodies are posted is to protect human health.
So can you say, I guess, how are the effects if it were to be a human ingested certain levels of blue-green algae versus just swimming in it?
So
is there a difference? I guess, yeah, so you're talking about like for lakes that maybe have warnings posted, if you ingest it, like if you're,
Yeah, well,
drinking up some,
you're not
yeah,
supposed to do that.
right. I
So
just wonder if it's a different level of adverse effects if you were to ingest it, like drink it, or versus
well, yeah, of
absorbing it
course.
through the skin.
Well, through the skin, the absorption is going to be only through open cuts. And so there's three different kinds of toxins. There's the dermatoxins, which cause a skin rash, right? Then there's the hepatotoxins, which cause hemorrhaging in the liver. And then there's the neurotoxins, which shut down your central nervous system. And the latter two, you have to ingest them. So if you go and take a gallon of water that's toxic and drink it, then of course you're going to have a much more severe effect than if you put your hand into that.
And can you kind of speak to how blue-green algae affects dogs? As we were kind of speaking earlier, so how does that affect dogs versus humans in the sense that they have fur coats and we just have skin, right?
Right. So we have skin, and then the water tends to run off us, and we also tend to towel ourselves off, or we go have a shower and clean ourselves, which is the recommendation if people come in contact with toxin or cyanobacteria laden water that's posted. Is the recommendation is go have a shower, clean yourself off. Well, our animals, unless we bathe them or give them a bath immediately after, they don't have that option. And so the dog fur or pet fur tends to act like a filter, and it filters out the algae onto that fur. And then when they lick themselves to clean themselves, they get a really nasty and heavy toxic dose, much more than what we would experience, because they filtered all of those algae out of the water column.
In that case, is it more lethal for dogs than humans in that sense, just because I guess they're collecting it in a sense, and they're
well, so it's not lethal to themselves as long as it's external. It's when they lick it and they ingest it that it becomes lethal. And their lethality and their toxin response to internal ingestion is the same as ours.
Let's see, and then kind of touched on this, but what causes the bloom? You mentioned there's the usual suspects, but what is it that causes those blooms?
So it's a suite of factors, one of which is our loving our lakes to death. And that's allowing nutrient runoff from the landscape to get into the water bodies. And here phosphorus is the main culprit. And so we get an overabundance of phosphorus, which makes nitrogen short supply. And many of these species that are toxic are able to fix nitrogen. And that's freely available in the atmosphere. So when nitrogen becomes short supply in the water, they can reach up into the atmosphere, grab that nitrogen, and then overcome their nitrogen limitation in the water body, because there's lots of phosphorus around. And then they just go into a massive bloom phase. And the other advantage that they have, because they have to get their nitrogen from the atmosphere, they form these scums right at the surface because they get it from the air. And when they form the scums, they shade out all of the other algae below them in the water column. So the good algae that we would want, that field of food web, typically they're shaded out. And again, it's a competitive advantage. Then it's very warm right now. Some of our lakes are running 27 degrees Celsius. That's sort of unheard of. And they do just fine at those high temperatures. Other algae don't.
So are we, sorry, I was going to ask, so is the inland Northwest alone in seeing these algae blooms, or can we see blue-green algae in other parts of the country?
Yeah, so we see them all across the US. There are warnings northeast, well, anywhere in the country, including Florida. Then internationally as well, Australia, South Africa have severe outbreaks of cyanobacteria. So you have to realize that cyanobacteria ubiquitously distributed across the world. They were some of the first organisms on the planet, and so they're everywhere. They're in every habitat.
Can't escape. So then how does it for lack of a term, how do we when does it die off? I guess when does it become safe, or are there tactics or strategies used to clear up our lakes and ponds so that they are safe to swim in again?
Well,
Or how long
so
does it
there's some dangerous stuff here. So you can add some chemicals to lakes that break up algal cells. The problem is when you do that, the water clears and people think it's safe, but the toxins are still present. So when these blooms die off is usually towards the end of the summer. It starts getting cold, the nights start getting longer, evenings and nights are colder, and then the conditions become less favorable for them. So then they die off. Sometimes there's so much of a bloom that it just kills itself. And you have to be really careful because like I said, the water clears up in a couple of days, but the toxins are still present. And this is also an issue when there's mats at the surface and the bloom is moving around the lake. The wind blows it from one end of the lake to the other, but there's still toxins present in the water column.
So you're saying even if the water doesn't look like that pea green blue algae color, there could be those adverse toxins in the water.
If there's an advisory on the lake, then heed that advisory and don't do stuff that you wouldn't do until that advisory is lifted. And that's a hard thing because right now we're at the cottage, we want to enjoy our lakes and it's hot out, we want to go swim. And then the most unfortunate thing is the lake gets posted as a no contact advisory, and that's very difficult.
I mean, how long until it is safe? How long does it take usually to see those advisories lifted? Is it something where it's not until the next summer?
So I've seen some advisories come and go in a 2-week cycle. So they get posted because somebody complains. A couple of weeks later, you know, the testing shows that there's no toxins present or no longer at harmful levels, and the algal cells have died off, and the advisory is lifted. And then I've seen lakes where we have 153, 160 days of advisory, and it starts in July and goes till clear end of October, November.
So from your experience with blue-green algae, are you concerned by the increased presence of this bloom in our area? Should we be concerned?
So that's kind of a double-edged. Sure. Okay, so I'll start. Sure, I would be concerned. One, from a public health perspective, and then second of all, from the just the increase in population, and then our flocking to the lakes and introducing materials to the lakes that normally wouldn't be there under natural conditions. And by that, I primarily mean nutrients, or if you do a lot of recreation activity along shorelines that are erodible, then you have the possibility of reintroducing nutrients that way.
Is there something that we can do maybe as community members to prevent it? Is there something we can do to take care of our lakes or ponds? I don't know, is there anything?
Sure there is. So if you're recreating that's causing a wake along the shoreline, do it elsewhere. Do it out in the open lake. If you're a homeowner that wants grass right up to the edge of the lake, quit doing that. Or if you do, don't fertilize it. And ideally a buffer strip would be good as well along the edge.
What do you mean buffer strip?
So instead of having mowed grass right to the edge so that if it rains it runs right into the lake, then have a swath of 30 or 50 feet of natural vegetation along the front of the property that at the land water interface.
I think my last question, so kind of spinning off of the incident we've been reporting on the Little Spokane River, where 2 dogs allegedly may have been poisoned by the algae. Department of Ecology, I mentioned, they did find some traces of blue-green algae in the river. It's kind of surprising because a lot of the research we've done and hearing from experts like yourself, blue-green algae typically forms in stagnant water. So I guess I wonder what your thoughts are hearing that there are traces of it in moving bodies of water like the Little Spokane River.
Sure, that's not surprising at all, because there are backwaters in rivers, there's eddies, and there's actually some very surprising stagnant water in rivers. I think a couple of years ago, the Willamette had an outbreak, and so well known, they're telling people to stay out of it. And so it's not too surprising that there is in moving water. So yes, true, they are typically in stagnant water, but then if they develop in a backwater area and then get flushed out, then that's not surprising that they're present in the river system.
I think that hits it on the head. Is there anything on that note that that you'd like to add? I know I asked a lot, but is there anything
Yeah,
I
no,
missed?
that's fine. I guess the soundbite is, if in doubt, stay out. And
Oh, you broke up there. Sorry.
oh, sorry. Okay, I guess the soundbite is, if in doubt, stay out. And then parents, really watch the kids. And then same with family pets, really watch them as well, right? And if they do get into it somewhere, then prevent them from licking their fur and get them washed off as fast as possible.